WordPress Accessibility Day 2023, Creating an Animation Pause Button in WordPress, with speaker Danielle Zarcaro, founder, Overnight Website by Kinetic Iris. This presentation was recorded September 28th, 2023.
Okay, hello everyone. So welcome to the WP Accessibility Day 2023, and we now have the next session is about to creating an animation pause button in WordPress. So the session will be hosted by Danielle, and let me introduce her. So Danielle Zarcaro is a founder of Overnight Website by Kinetic Iris, they are from the United States. Uh, uh, Danielle Zarcaro is the queer non-binary founder of Overnight Website and Kinetic Iris. They have been developing and maintaining custom WordPress website for over a decade. They will get excited anytime there is a gadget to tinker with or a puzzle to put together. They love snuggling their cat, husky, and fiance, and there's nothing better than putting Dunkin's hot chocolate in their coffee to put smile on their face. You will often find them awake past sunrise and end up in time for the sunset. So let me share the now the stage is yours, Daniel. Thank you.
Okay. So thank you so much. Before we start, just quickly at the top of each of my slides are going to be my handle where you can find me on most places. And that's at queer dev person. And then you'll find the link to the slides, which is overnightwebsite.com/WPA11Y day. And then the hashtag is on the right, WPA11Y day again. So first, a quote from the illustrious Dr. Ian Malcolm of Jurassic Park. Your scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they could, they didn't stop to think if they should. I'm not a voice actor. Otherwise I would try to give more of a Dr. Ian Malcolm voice tone, but he is quite unique. So whether you consider yourself on the science side of things or the art side of things, maybe the admin side of things, we should all be asking ourselves why we do things, digging deeper into each choice we make about what we put on our websites. And as we ask ourselves these questions, we also ask ourselves if something we're doing can cause issues for someone when they want to use the site. That's the first step in answering the should we do this or why are we doing this question. For a lot of accessibility issues, things that create a barrier to using our sites, it's a matter of fixing the issue, right? Inaccessible navigation gets fixed. Alt text gets added to images. Heading order is addressed. Captions added to videos. Color contrast improved. Then there are things that have a broader range of options, things that can be seen as annoying that you're adding to the page, optional things. So the first thing to consider when adding something to a site, and I'd argue this question is worth asking for a large amount of things that can get added to a site, is this necessary? Can this be done in a way that doesn't need an entirely separate control or configuration? It's making sure there's a reason for what you're doing. In this case, our question is, are the animations necessary? Can we use images to achieve the same thing? Can someone get the same feeling from some other method besides motion? In my case, I had created my new agency website, and while I could have kept it to pretty much almost all text, I knew I wanted to add something to break it up. The options are sort of limitless in this case, right? Use a lot of color, an image, an icon, background image with a gradient, something to give the eyes a break, reinforce the text, and give a little bit of feeling. For Kinetic Iris, we're a development studio. A lot of what we do does not have the type of visuals that you would put on a page that's enticing to the audience. It's just a bunch of code, right? Maybe some site examples. I didn't want to crawl through hundreds of stock photos. I didn't want to go completely in the opposite direction of simple icons or SVGs. I wanted it dynamic. The company name has the word kinetic in it. I wanted motion. And it gives a little bit more of that interactive feel to reinforce the custom development side of things. So in regards to the bigger question of generally, is this something you just want to throw on the site because you think it looks neat? Is it something that actually enhances the site? Is there a different way you can convey this information or brand feel without adding a perpetually moving image? If it's a slider, ask if it's actually doing what you want it to. Can this information be conveyed in a more user-friendly way that's more engaging without having to also add all that extra required interaction to it? So in my case, the answer was yes, proceed with the animation. So once we've answered the should I question, that's when you start to explore the requirements that you have to satisfy and the reasons behind those requirements. What are the issues that people could have with motion and animation, and what can we do to help them use our site? So, as it says on the slide here, animations can present a variety of barriers or issues for website visitors. We want to provide a way that respects their initial settings and then lets them decide how they want to proceed. So this is sort of our mission statement for our animation, right? We'd be respecting the reduce motion options and then giving them the option to then completely stop animations and movement altogether. This falls under 4 success criterion outlined here, depending on the type of animation that you're adding. You have 2.2.2, which is pause, stop, hide. That's a level requirement. It's about information that's on the page for longer than 5 seconds, so that when it gets paused, any sliders won't autoplay. You can implement a more subtle transition than a slide, sort of like a fade, for instance. Switch out those fancy new marquees that have been popping up now as the latest trend. Create a non-moving text banner instead. Pause the circle that's going around constantly. This is for people who can't read quickly. For automatically moving text, which can provide problems for screen readers, it provides severe distraction, which interferes with the ability to concentrate on other parts of the page, can cause nausea, dizziness, headaches if scrolling page elements move. It can trigger the vestibular or inner ear disorders. Flashing or blinking can cause seizures due to photosensitivity. There's a lot of things here that people could have problems with when it comes to motion and animation. There's also 3 other ones. There's 2.3.1, 3 flashes are below threshold. And then there's that's A level. Then there's the AAA level, which is just 3 flashes. That's 2.3.3. And then you also have, 2.3.2. Then you have the 0.3.1, which is the animation from interaction, which is also AAA. So just as a quick differentiation, pause, stop, hide is when the page loads and initiates the animation. So content loading, page loading, anything like that. Animation from interaction is the user initiating the interaction, like hover or scrolling. And how you handle the A level is pretty much how you handle and address the AAA level, which is offer a way to pause and respect user preferences. Some of our options to address these would be to just remove page load, scroll features, stick a pause button under each animation. But we want to make this as easy as possible while still giving a fun experience, right? We don't want them to have to pause every single animation by having a toggle button at the top of the page. We give someone the ability to control that animation before they get there, rather than having to be exposed to it and then pause it. So there's a media query that I'll refer to as we go, prefers reduced motion, that we're going to look at. But that means reduced motion, right? You don't have to just remove all animation totally. You provide a pared down experience in terms of movement. So we can use that and respect it, and then give people a way to control the animation that maybe don't want to set it on their computers. Maybe they want to temporarily pause it. So we're offering options here. I also kind of like the idea of giving someone who turned on reduced motion to allow the website to show the motion if they wanted. I sometimes turn it on and off based on my own needs regarding overstimulation, eye strain, depending on what the type of animation is, it'll make me a little bit dizzy. How great would it be if I had an option on a site that let me decide what I wanted to do in that moment? I think this is kind of where those accessibility overlays, their intention hopefully came from, which is to allow users to control things on a site without having to set it on their computer settings. But they haven't done it in a way that's accessible, and they create more problems than they solve. And so what we're doing is targeting a very specific situation that directly applies to our website and ensuring that it works for our site. We're not providing 100 different options that somebody has to go through. We're providing this one thing that's going to enhance a user's experience. A big part of this is making the right decisions. If an animation is going to blink, if it's going to be distracting, if it's going to be a problem for someone before they can even find the pause button, don't do it. Just because you can add a button to a site doesn't give you permission to now do whatever you want. We're just thinking of a better user experience here. So with that, here's what we're going to be building. It's a button that controls animation or play, an animation play or pause state. It should default to the user's preferences and save the state of the button across pages. It should be accessible to people using a mouse, a keyboard, or a screen reader. So that's sort of our project summary here. We had our mission statement. Now we've got a summary of what we're doing. I'm going to have a link show up here. It's github.com/queerdevperson/animation-toggle. That's going to get you the code that we're going to go over. It's also, again, on the slide link that I have at the top, overnightwebsite.com/WPA11Y-day. That's link is going to be on that webpage as well. So if we exit out of this really quickly, the README on the GitHub just gives you an overview of the different files that are there. And then if we take a quick look at, for instance, functions, toggle, style, there's different files here with the idea that you would add this to a theme. I'll go over some future plans for this at the end of the presentation, but basically this is kind of to give you an idea of what to do, just so that we had our eyes on it for a minute. There's always multiple ways to do things. So back in the slideshow here, we want to research our options, pick the best one. Luckily for us, a lot of smart people have tested out our options. We can go through that and gather that research and give us a really nice starting point. You don't need to start from scratch. I looked around at examples of accessible toggle buttons, read why people created things in certain ways, what would most closely resemble what I was trying to do. I definitely wanted it to look like the toggle button you'd find in an iPhone. That seems to be the most common pattern you find. I have a few examples up on the slide. We have some Google Calendar settings examples in the top left. It's got two options, one's on and one's off. They give you different options to show the week number, show declined events. So it's like a group of options with these toggle buttons over on the right, and the circle in direction on the left or right, and the background color both indicate the, whether it's on or off. Below that, we have the Apple iPhone settings, different color, but same principle. They handle their labels a little differently in terms of, how to word these things. So that's another, barrier to get through. The example on the right is a screenshot of 3 different options. You have a similar pattern, but with the words on and off to sort of additionally indicate which one is actually on or off so that you don't have to guess. You have an option below that where it's sort of like a button shape that's split in half and the background color indicates whether it's on or off. I personally really hate this option because I can never decide which one's right or wrong. And honestly, I kind of click it 3 or 4 times just to be sure that I put it in the right place. So that one I knew I wanted to stay away from. The one on the bottom is probably how you would go about doing a background color indicator, where you sort of have this background color, then you have a background color that's different on your options, then you have a background color on the selected option, and they all have padding around them. It's a little bit clearer, but this is really good for more than 2 options. So I kind of knew I wanted to stick with the toggle. So what we're going to be doing in terms of, here, I'll give one more slide here. Sorry. So when we look at our code and we start with the HTML, because where else do you start but the bones of your site? We know that we're going to add a body class, and we do this because targeting that CSS class in our CSS and in our JavaScript is going to be really helpful. And it's just good to know overall, are we animating or are we not? So it's sort of this like point of truth almost at the top of the document. As far as the HTML element to use, technically there are multiple elements that we could use to create the action of toggling. It's pretty much a button or checkbox are really the ones that it comes down to. The checkbox isn't going to give us all of the features we're looking for when it comes to styling, accessibility, semantics. At the end of the slideshow, the second to last slide has links. So it's got, I think, 4 links in it. So the first link is going to go into a good breakdown of why to use a button. It's the Adrian Roselli link. And that was actually where I was able to get a good starting point for my toggle button styles too. So in our case, it's a button. Buttons do something when they're pushed. That's what we're going for. We have one thing that we're turning on and off, and our one button is going to have 2 states that we're working with. So technically you could have 2 buttons, but in our case, it adds unnecessary complexity. We're never going to have more than on or off. So there's no need to account for a possible future third option. We're going to be indicating these 2 states that we're working with through our JavaScript and then through a screen reader attribute using aria pressed. It's going to default to false because if JavaScript isn't loaded, the animations aren't running. So we want it to be off and then use our JavaScript to turn it on if somebody interacts with it. We're using this through aria pressed. Technically, again, there are 2 options here. There's aria checked and aria pressed. I went into a pretty deep dive into this to try to figure out what the differences were. Aria checked basically turns a button into a checkbox, which isn't quite the intended behavior that we want. It's not reliably read out through across all screen readers. It can often end up with unpredictable behavior. So aria pressed it is, and that's what we're going to use to target again in our CSS and JavaScript. We have to think about what the button text should be, much like those examples that I showed that have Google using like show this option and then you say yes or no, and then Apple sort of goes a little bit more general sometimes and says like, here's this option, do you want it or not? So do we say play animations? Do we say animations? How do we label that? We have we have the option to add icons in there, kind of like that on-off example. So these status indicators, whether it's words, icons, we use aria hidden to hide those. When I tested it using my screen reader, it actually didn't read them out when I didn't have aria hidden on there, but you can't be sure that that's always going to be the case. And so to be safe, you hide those definitely. So aria hidden equals true. And then in terms of the animations themselves, there were a few things on my list that I wanted to try. I could always use more practice with CSS animations. I want to dive deeper into animating SVGs, but I had heard about Lottie images. And so my first instinct was to go the other route because I hate loading extra stuff when I don't have to, but this could be a really good way to streamline the process. And so this gave me the opportunity to look into that. And so that's what we're using today. There is a Lottie WordPress plugin that's Lottie. It lets you embed things right on the page, give you the options for playing and pausing, but it didn't give you full control. And because we're adding more than one to a page and I want to do some very specific things, it's easiest to manually add each of these things to the page. So if we go out of this slideshow again and head over to our code, we're going to look really quickly through this functions.php file. Basically, what we're doing in here are 2 things. First is loading in our scripts and our styles. We have our general style sheet. You can stick these things in a dedicated style sheet. However you handle your styles, we got to get them in here. Then we have 2 Lottie scripts. So we have the first one, which is the general player. Then we have I have 2 ways that the things are being animated through Lottie scripts. Now I've toggled over to my Kinetic Iris site. I have the animations turned on And we have one that sort of plays perpetually. It's a couple of floating, computer and mug, and something's happening on the computer screen. Now we have two that are like wireframe type mock-ups. One is of like a hero area and one is of a whole site, and they animate on scroll. So in order to do that animate on scroll stuff, we load in this Lottie interactive script. And then finally, we add in our JavaScript file. Again, however you handle your assets, it could be in its own file, it could be in a main script file, however you want to do it. Add those into the site. Then the second thing that we're doing in our functions file is adding that body class. We're starting with no animation happening. So all we're going to do is add in the no animation class onto the body, and then toggling that through our JavaScript. So that's all that's happening in this functions file. If we head over to our HTML file, I've included the body tag just for a complete view of what this would look like. This would theoretically be included either dynamically through a full site editing theme or manually through a header file in a classic theme. And then it would, through our functions file, add in that no animation class. But I'm adding it here just for a complete view of the HTML. Now, the way that I'm adding this to my theme right now is through just custom HTML blocks. And what that allows me to do is handle everything through the traditional full site editing, through the traditional page templates with the block editor, and I can just stick in what I need. Now, again, I'll go over a better way that I plan on doing this in the future. But for now, it's really nice because at some point I can swap this in for a custom block. I can do whatever I need to. I don't have to create some kind of custom header template. I don't have to do anything. Everything is still within this sort of bigger WordPress ecosystem. And then in this tiny area, I'm sticking my custom HTML. So I've basically extracted that and stuck that in this HTML file for you. We're wrapping our toggle button in a toggles wrapper div. And then we have our actual toggle button element, again, with an ID. We've called it animation controls, and we're going to use our JavaScript to target that. And then we're using aria pressed equals false, again, to default to no animation. And then here, I just have two icons. It's a span with aria hidden equals true, and then I just pasted the SVG code in there. At the bottom of the HTML file, I have the examples of the 3 animations that I have on my homepage. And it's basically sort of the same pattern with different values, right? I've added a div class Lottie wrapper to contain my Lottie element. I've added the Lottie player element with a different ID depending on the one that we're using, the source file, which is basically just when you come over to the lottiefiles.com website. I have 2 examples here of the 2 of the ones that I have on scroll. And basically, you go here to this download button, you click on it and download the Lottie JSON file, and then I just upload that directly in. And again, you're going to want to lock that down based on who's using the site. So only like trusted admins can use the JSON, upload feature, but you ideally would enable a JSON upload or, some other method. Maybe it's on a Google Drive somewhere. However you want to add this file, and then adding the width and the height. And then what I've done is I basically take an SVG of one of the frames of the animation and added that in a no script tag, because again, when the JavaScript is disabled, nothing loads at all. So if there's no script, I add the SVG element with the alt text and the height and width. So that's basically the overview of the HTML. If we come back to our slideshow, we're going to go over the CSS code. I'm calling out just a few things. We have 2 states, animations playing, animations paused. So that's on and off. And then we have a focus and a hover to test for both of those states. And then we're using the aria pressed attribute to target. And then I've added some prefers reduced motion examples. And so if we go back to our code and we go to the style.css file that I've added, as I mentioned, I have that Lottie player, I have the Lottie wrapper. So I've added some of those styles just to give it a general conformity. And then we go into our main toggle styles. I'm not going to go through each of these. You can, read through these if you want. But we're using the aria pressed attribute rather than some kind of ID or class, because it helps us, if we scroll down a little bit, to be able to use then the aria pressed true and false. And this way we're sort of keeping the specificity at a minimum, just for, best practice's sake. And then this way we can sort of visualize what we're doing by having, aria pressed with no value is just in general, and then aria pressed with a true value and a false value. So it's easier for us to visualize what's going on in our CSS code. So then we're targeting the play and pause icons. We have the background and the circle that toggles back and forth. We have when the animations are on, that means that aria pressed equals true. So we're adding the different colors to that. The animations are off. So we've adjusted the colors for that, different opacities for different things, and then the hover and focus states for those. So this is kind of a straightforward style document in terms of what's going on. Couple of screen size adjustments for when it gets small. You don't want to go too small, but just so that it fits in the header nicely. And then at the bottom here, so my site doesn't have a ton of animation beyond these Lottie files, but by setting up this sort of thing at the bottom, I have the only thing that plays no matter what is the toggle. So if we click on this toggle on the Kinetic Iris site, we can see this very subtle sort of sliding action of back and forth. That's very minimal. And if you turn that animation on and off based on their selection, it sort of ends up in this kind of stuttery experience where it animates on, but then like slaps over to off. And so it's not ideal. So I felt that this was fine to keep on at all times. And then everything else, it's kind of your preference, right? So you can code all of your styles to align with when animations are off, and then use the media queries and the animation class that we've added to then add that transition into things, to add the different motion to all the different elements. Or you can sort of animate it and code it and do whatever, and then use that media query and class to turn that off. I really like to default to nothing. And then when somebody's not made the choice to reduce, or when somebody is explicitly sort of permitting you to have animations, that's when I turn them on, because then we're ensuring a good, solid experience for everybody, and then giving that sort of extra oomph for people who want it. So that's kind of my preference, but I have the examples down here that you can, sort of use and play around with, and then use that animation or no animation class accordingly. So if you wanted to target no animation, you would just do no animation instead of animation. So that's our style sheet. Again, pretty straightforward. The JavaScript is really where we're going to get a little bit more fun with it, right? So we're going to, as an overview over on our slideshow, we have the options to set, get, and update our animation status when we load the page and when they interact with the button. We're going to use the prefers reduced motion and a previous interaction with the toggle button. And then we play or pause the animations on load and interaction. So that's kind of the summary of what our JavaScript file is going to be doing. So if we head over to our JavaScript file, I've tried to comment as much as possible in these files. So it's going to be a lot of comments. Not too many. I tried to be diplomatic with it, but give you enough information so you could at least see what's going on. So basically, once our page is loaded, we're going to get a few things. We're going to get the person's reduced motion preference from their system settings. Then we're going to get the status of the toggle button that's on the site. And again, that if we had put our HTML to the other side here, that's going to be this toggle button, the button ID with animation controls. That's what we're going to get, that status of that button. And then we are also going to get the element itself. so that we can interact with it. And then we're going to get the different Lottie player elements that we have on the page. So those are the things that we're getting in order to use to do these two things. First, we set an initial status based on our user preferences if it doesn't, if they haven't yet come to the site, right? So if there's no toggle element setting, that's because they haven't been here before or interacted with the page. And so what we're going to do is grab the person's preference and act accordingly. So if they don't have reduced on, we're going to go ahead and set our local storage that's going to help us track the user's preference through our pages. We're going to set that to be play. And then we're going to call our play animations function and go ahead and play everything. Otherwise, we're going to have everything be paused. So we're going to set our local storage item to pause, and we're going to pause animations. If they have come to the site before and we do have an animation status, now again, as a reminder, that's our status of the toggle button on the site, we're going to just either play or pause. And so all of this logic that I've just gone over is for on-page load. So when the page loads, we have to figure out whether to play or pause. And then so what we do is we see if there's an animation status. If not, we play or pause according to settings. If there is, then we go ahead and play and pause according to their toggle options. So now we have to do something when they click the toggle button. So when they click it, we're going to get that animation status that we've set from the page load, and we're going to hold on to that. We're going to check against that. If that equals play, we're going to then do the opposite, because what's going to happen? They're going to an element, say that it's an element that's playing, right? So if we have an element, if we go back to our website here, our animations are toggled to on. Now, when I click this, it currently equals play. And so now I have to pause everything. So if it equals play, we have to pause everything. If it equals pause, we play everything. So it's a little bit of, wait a minute, but that's what we're doing. We're doing the opposite of what they want because the current value, it needs to be toggled. And that's it. That's our logic. Now we have two functions here, the playing and the pausing. So they're going to pretty much mirror each other in terms of what they're doing, and then just setting things opposite. So we set our value in our local storage to play. If we're playing, so this is the play animations function. Then we set our new ARIA value role to ARIA pressed equals true. And so if I show my console here, if I click this, you can see that the button ARIA pressed equals true equals false. And so that's what we're changing. And then you can also see the body class changing as well up here. And that's what we do next. We add on animation, and then we remove the no animation. We then play the animations. Now, like I said, there's two things happening, two types of animations happening. There's the continuous player, which is that computer that's sort of lightly bouncing. That one's pretty straightforward. That's the computer player element that we have, just dot play. The other two are based on scroll. So that's where the Lottie player interactivity guide comes into play. It's lottiefiles.com/interactivity. They go through a ton of examples of different ways that you can use JavaScript to interact with their elements. And so basically for me, it's kind of straightforward. You use their Lottie interactivity class, which is what we called that second script for in our functions. And then we create a new element. The player is the browser, is the ID of the element. The mode is scroll, and then a few actions. So we have visibility goes from 0 to 1 because we're turning it on. So it's going from not showing it to showing it. The type is seek. And then the frames, that's really the only other thing. You have the player ID and then the frames. Those are the two things that really change on each of these. And the way to find out the number of frames is you find what you like. I think you have to create an account. I'm currently logged in. And so what you do is you find the one you like, and there's underneath the animation, there's a little cog that's settings. You click that. Then there's animation details that shows up. And then there's an item here under the info that says frames. And so that's going to give you the number of frames. So you can see that one was 152, this one's 119. And so you can use any numbers. This is basically the start frame and the end frame. And so you can basically use any numbers to start or end. I just like the whole thing. So I start at 0 and end at the final frame. But it's up to you how you want to animate that throughout whatever your frames are. So the only thing that really I need to go over in the pause function, again, we're setting our local storage to pause, we're changing our aria press to false, we're switching out our body class, the computer player that we have, the one that's continuous, that one just is .pause. The other ones, you'll see this Lottie interactivity .create looks almost exactly the same, except the only thing that changes is under frames, instead of it being from 0 to whatever, it's now just a single frame. And so that can be any of the ones. You kind of, if there's a specific place you want to pause it at, you kind of have to play a little bit with it. I hadn't quite figured out how to find the exact frame, but I kind of just went to the end, and like you can see that this one that I'm on here, which is the whole browser, the whole browser window scrolling as you scroll the page, the last frame sort of whites out. So what I did is I went a couple of frames before that in terms of the final frame. So that's the only change is the frames. If we come back to our slideshow, that's it. It's in hindsight, this is very simple. It's a journey for all of these things, right? So if we go back, testing, you just iterate on all your options. I might have a couple of minutes here. So these are screen recordings. They don't have any sound. I'm gonna kind of just tell you what is happening in each of them. It's just to give you an example of the thought process and how I got to where I was. Because I got things working. Once I figured out how to work with Lottie files, that was kind of the first hurdle I had to jump through because I wasn't familiar with it. It's just new. And so you work with it, right? And so once I figured that out, everything really fell into place with the rest of the code. And then we just kind of ended up with these micro decisions, right? So this first one, as an example, is in the bottom left of each of these animations that I'm playing, shows you what the screen reader would read out, but it basically says play animation selected toggle button, then play animations toggle button, then selected play animations toggle button. And so that's what the screen reader reads out. I felt like that was a good place to start. The screen reader is nice because it's saying, play animations, select it, yes. But visually, to me, I didn't necessarily like that because the circle indicator is in the opposite direction of where my label is, right? My button text. And so because we don't have a group of options together to sort of give us context, it felt a little weird. So what I did was I then went to animations and I tested that one. But what I did was I had added also on and off text into a pseudo element, and it's a little hard to catch. So watch that bottom screen reader box on the bottom left. You can sort of see it flash this text that comes on. It starts out the same as the other one, animations on selected toggle button, but then it reads animations off and then animations on. So it sort of skips over that toggle thing, because when we dynamically add content to a button, it messes with the screen reader. So that obviously wasn't the right choice. So then what I did try that switch option just to see what it was like. VoiceOver seemed to handle it pretty well. I kind of liked it, but since it didn't have full support, I didn't want to use it. And it basically says, let's see, off animations on switch, off animation switch. So it's kind of nice and concise, but it's not fully supported. So that's where we ended up to this sort of final iteration before we got to the one with the icons. It's basically the same as the first one, just with the word animations. And I felt like it was a good compromise between the screen reader and the visual usability. I did consider going back to play animations, but I opted to keep the shorter label. The icons might not be necessary. So we have this final version that's currently on the website with the play and the pause. It might not be necessary, but I don't like ambiguity. Part of my neurodivergence and part of what's helping me navigate the web easier is just removing all ambiguity. It doesn't hurt anything to add these icons, and it helps people like me. So I said, add them. It also makes it more consistent with the things like light and dark mode, and they have like the sun and the moon icon. So it kind of felt right, free from ambiguity, nice and concise. Here's what the options are. So in terms of some final steps here, future plans would be, I kind of hinted at this earlier, make it dynamic, right? Put it in a plugin as a custom block. And let's exit out of this again. So we have, just to review, a few places where we're hard coding things, right? So we have in our HTML, we have our Lottie player ID, the source, the height, the width, the no script image, the alt text. And then we have whether it's a continuous scroll or whether it's a continuous animation or an on-scroll animation. And all those could just be variables that we plug into this, basic script and text, and then being able to make this dynamic by not having to hard code these Lottie elements in here and be able to iterate among things that have a certain class or things like that. So this is sort of, proof of concept. It's get everything working. And then, like I said, the good news is I can go in here and just swap out this custom HTML for a plugin, right? So if I made it dynamic, stuck it in a plugin, activate the plugin, now I can use that on any site at all, and then I'm adding in the elements from the custom block. So that's sort of the next phase of this, would be to make this a truly reusable thing that now I don't have to do anything to my theme. I don't have to mess with anything. All I have to do is swap out this custom HTML for a new block. There's not one way to do it, and there's obviously improvements that can be made. In terms of some final thoughts on this, this can, like I said, be used for any type of setting that needs to be toggled, but use the right method, right? If you have something that has more than 2 options, you're going to want multiple buttons. And then don't add a bunch of toggles to your website. We aren't trying to rebuild some kind of custom accessibility overlay situation. We don't need to give everybody 100 different things to customize. If it's a web app that somebody's on for hours in a day, they have a settings page, turn on dark mode, turn on, animations, minimize this, do that. That's great. But for a website, we have the most useful thing, stick it at the top. The rest can be used as according to their system preferences, right? So we sort of pick what would be the most impactful, 1, maybe 2. I've seen a few websites do an animation one and a color mode one. Those seem like the most useful, and those can be at the top, but we don't want to have somebody tabbing through a million options. It's just not necessary. You use this as a base idea and get the most important, relevant thing for your users, put it at the top, pick what makes the most sense, and focus on those. And so that's it for me. I have 4 links here that again are on my overnight website page for this session. And then you can also download these slides and click on them from here. And that gives you some background information on, where I got some of my information on the Lottie files and so on. You can then, the great thing is you can take this and sort of use it for custom CSS. You can use it for animating SVGs, all that stuff. And then if you want to learn more, there is overnightwebsite.com/links. And that's it for me. I think I'll leave this up, see if anybody needs me.
Thank you, Danielle, for the wonderful session. We do not have much we do not have much questions in the Q&A box. So if still anyone has the questions, you can still post the questions or in the box so we can have it.
At a full screen.
Meanwhile, I am sharing this session link here in the chat box. So if anyone want to grab the slides, they can grab from here.
Yeah, and then what I'll do is I'll put the direct link to this as well.
Yes.
So this here is overnightwebsite.com/WPA11Y day. And then that's the link that was at the top of my slides as well.
Correct.
And I'm always around for questions too. So like I said, at Queer Dev Person, if you're watching this later and you come up with a question or a feature request or a suggestion or anything like that, you know, I'm always down for conversations.
Yes, correct. Okay, let me wait 1 minute. If still there is a one. Yes, there is a one question, Daniel, from the Luna. Do you have any advice for pushing A11Y at your workplace or beginning your own business?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it's basically kind of how I approached this one element, right? Just on a bigger scale. So much like I walked through the individual things of why am I adding this? Is it going to cause any problems? You know, basically everything I ran through in my journey of adding an accessibility, you know, single toggle is kind of how you approach everything else. It's all about a process and finding a couple of good resources. There's the WordPress accessibility meetup. There's all kinds of blogs. Anything that you can find to give you some starting points. And then once you learn one thing, add on another. It's really just about starting, and sort of once you start thinking about things in terms of accessibility, that's kind of how you tend to look at everything when it comes to websites. And you're always sort of looking through things in that lens. And it's really just about asking questions and being curious and doing some research to try to find the best way to do it. I would say look into accessibility statements. I think a lot of times if we give people a great place to find us and report issues that they have and make it easy to find, stick it in the footer and give it a very clear way to contact you, that's a good way to know what problems people are having. And that's a good place to start. And yeah, I would just find ways to just start with things, do the easy stuff. Like I had sort of rattled off in the beginning, you have like heading order and image alt text, and you know, an accessible navigation is really, you know, hard to do as a beginner thing. So like pick something and sort of just dive right into it and see where it takes you. Just kind of be in it for the journey, I think.
One more question from the same person, which is about what are your thoughts on 3js.org and its accessibility?
I have no idea. I just clicked on it. Let's see, 3JS. So I would be interested in learning about what it is. If you want to, you know, reach out to me, tell me about it, and I can sort of be a little more informed about how to approach it. I don't really know much about it. Is it an animation library? Is that what it is?
Okay. Thank you, Danielle.
Yeah, so if that's what it is, I don't know. It probably, my first instinct would be to answer it's probably as accessible as somebody makes it, right? So if it's an animation library, it's going to be something that somebody's going to use and put together. Let's see, 3JS allows you to use 3D models in web design, and then the motion sensitivity. So I would say, again, my first instinct is to say, have it be a conditional thing, like only showing on people who explicitly allow it, and then user test it. I would say it probably depends on how much motion you're adding, how much you know, blinking there is. It's gonna really depend on what you're doing within that 3D element. And then I would say, you know, that kind of stuff you probably have to user test and get some feedback on whether it causes issues for people.
Okay, so no any more questions. So let's go towards the conclusions. So Thank you for attending this session with Danielle. You can continue the conversation in the chat or on social media using hashtag WPA11YDay and hashtag WPAD2023. We also appreciate it if you go to 2023.wpaccessibility.day/feedback. I am sharing the link in the chat to provide anonymous feedback for our speakers on their presentation and can enter to win a t-shirt while you are there. Stay tuned for the next coming up session. And while you are waiting, don't forget to visit our sponsors page to grab virtual swag and enter for a chance to win great prizes. See you right here after the break. Thank you.
Thank you to WordPress Accessibility Day 2023 sponsors. Platinum sponsor, Equalize Digital. Equalize Digital's Accessibility Checker plugin is an automated accessibility scanning tool that helps WordPress websites become and stay accessible. Platinum sponsor, Gravity Forms. Gravity Forms is the professional form builder that you need to create beautiful, powerful, and accessible forms. Gold sponsors, 20i, DQ, Empire Caption Solutions, Pressable, and WP Engine. Silver sponsors, Code Geek, Drake Cooper, GoDaddy, Lone Rock Point, NerdPress, Overnight Website by Kinetic Iris, Riola Networks, A11Y Collective, and The Blogsmith. Bronze sponsors, Accessicart, Green Geeks Web Hosting, Hall Analysis SEO Consulting, HDC, ITX, IvyCat, MetaBox, Pixel Chefs, Simply Schedule Appointments, SiteGround, Termageddon, Underrepresented in Tech, Weglot, and Yoast.